Monkey.
This story doesn't start on Saddleworth Moor. It starts with a mother and a 48-year wait that never came. Most people think that they know what happened, but they don't know what came after. Because this isn't just the story of a little boy that went missing. This is the story of Winnie Johnson, the mother that found herself at the centre of two of Manchester's most darkest chapters. And somehow, she refused to be broken by it.
In 1964, 12-year-old Keith Bennett set off for his grandmother's house. It was a normal day, a normal street in Longsight. Nothing to suggest that within minutes, the world would shift forever. As the days turned into decades, that ordinary moment became a national tragedy.
I'd never give up, even if it took me years to come up here and find him, I'd do it. You wouldn't keep me away from this place.
The names of the killers became infamous. The details were revisited time and time again. But while the rest of the country watched the news, Winnie Johnson was living it. For her, the story didn't end when the cameras went away. It didn't end when the convictions were handed out. For her, it never ended at all. Today we're following the path that the story left behind. From the pavements in Longsight, where Keith was last seen, to the silence of the moors. And finally, to the place where it all come to rest.
Right, so here I am, and I'm in Longsight, and if I just pan the camera round to this door, this house over here, number 29 with the black door, this is Winnie's old house, and this is significant to the story because she lived there when poor Keith was alive, and this was the last time that she ever saw him alive. You know, a poor son left this house right here, and Winnie was at the door with Keith and said her goodbyes and waved him off down this street, and he was only going to his nana's, and the poor lad was never ever seen again. But this is significant to the whole story because this is the house where, you know, it sort of haunted her, you know, every single day. She lived there, and it was just a capsule of memories, basically. But this was where life went from being normal to being a living nightmare. And I'm sure Keith would have, you know, he'd have played on these streets when he was younger. He would have been walking these same steps that I'm walking now. And yeah, it's very, very sad to think. And I mean, oh, that's pretty weird. There's a set of glasses on the floor. Very strange.
What started it didn't end here. Because for Winnie, this street became the beginning of something that would follow her for the rest of her life. The search didn't stop when the days passed, or when the years began to build. It led her out of the city and onto the cold moors. A place that would come to represent everything she didn't have. Answers, closure, and a place to bring the son home from.
So this is where the story brings us. This is Saddleworth Moor, And you know, the first thing that strikes you when you get out of the car is how vast it is. And you know, other than the wind whistling past your ears, there is no sound. And it's heartbreaking to think that poor Winnie spent a good section of her life searching for her son up here. And sadly, her son Keith was never found, and to this day has never been found. Now, you know, she was just a mum from Manchester. She had a heart of gold. She never did any wrong to anyone, you know. And she never gave up. You know, she never ever gave up searching for her son. And all she wanted was to be able to be at peace, if that was even, you know, if that's even a thing. But she just wanted peace, and she wanted somewhere where she could grieve, you know. And the resilience that she's shown over her life in the pursuit for her son, you know, it never ended. She never ever gave up. And what a super strong woman Winnie were. Where I'm stood now, you'll see there's like these sort of dips in the ground, these big massive gouges. Now, these aren't natural formations, these are actually where the police came up here in search for the children, and these are actual where the cherry pickers were digging out big chunks and big sections of land. So where I'm actually stood here, you'll see all these big sort of gouges in the moor, and this is probably a hot spot where, you know, they felt like they had to dig here. Whether they retrieved some of the bodies, I could be walking like through the section right now, or maybe it was, you know, they didn't get any success, but they had good reason to dig around here. And you know, I'm not going to delve too much into the crime. It's horrific enough, and people have heard it regurgitated, you know, 1,000,001 times on YouTube and documentaries. So you don't need me to go into the, you know, details. But all I will say is there's a very ominous feeling up here. There's a very strange feeling, and you can't quite put your finger on it. And there shouldn't be, you know, it's a beautiful place. It's absolutely stunning. Sort of feels like you're on a different planet. But there's just this vibe up here where you can feel that evil has touched it. And it is the feeling of the murders that went on. You can feel the pain, you can feel the heartache, and you can feel the sort of helplessness up here. I mean, I could scream at the top of my voice right now and not a soul would hear me. But this is one of the main places where poor Winnie would spend endless hours with her hands in the mud, you know, just searching for her son.
The Moors kept its secret close. No matter how many times she returned, the land refused to give them up. And for Brady, the silence became something he held on to, like a final piece of control that he refused to give back. Yet despite the ache of every visit, she couldn't stay away. Because out there, it was the closest that she could feel to her son.
I'd never give up, even if it took me years to come up here and find him, I'd do it.
And for most, the story would end there. But for Winnie, it didn't. Because years later, back in the city, she would find herself facing the same kind of loss all over again. A different world, but the same kind of grief.
I'm in the beautiful Southern Cemetery, and this would be a place that Winnie would have to come and visit. Now, you know, as she was still looking for Keith, you know, she never ever stopped looking for Keith till the day that she died. But the days rolled on, and the days turned into weeks, the weeks turned into months, and the months turned into years. Before she knew it, decades had passed. And little would she know that her heart would be broken yet again, because she took care of her grandson, Anthony, and Winnie having such a big heart, you know, Anthony's mother was not in a good place in her life, and Winnie stepped in, being the beautiful mother that she were. She stepped in and basically took Anthony on, and she treated Anthony as her own. But little did she know that Anthony would one day be at the centre of one of Manchester's biggest crimes. And little did she know he would become who he were, because Anthony Johnson became, aka Anthony White Tony Johnson, of the Cheetham Hill gang, and he was gunned down in brutal fashion outside a pub in Cheetham Hill.
By the late 1980s, Manchester was changing. The underworld was no longer a collection of street brawlers. It became business. And Cheetham Hill, a group known as the Hillbillies, were building a reputation linked to armed robberies, violence, and a growing presence across the city. And in the middle of it all stood one man who didn't fit the mould. Anthony Johnson, better known on the streets as White Tony, the grandson of poor Winnie. He wasn't just a face in the crowd. He was the only white member of one of the city's most active black crews. And he wasn't there to just observe. Tony was a heavy hitter, a man who wore a bulletproof vest, like a second skin. And he wasn't afraid of the guns that he carried. By 22, Tony had lived a lifetime of violence. He was a prime suspect in the murder of Anthony Scratch Gardner. He terrorised the doorman at the legendary Hacienda, bringing the chaos to the centre of Manchester. But his real undoing started with a payday. November 1990, a security van heist at Mum's Bridge in Oldham. And the take, £362,000. And in that world, money is more than currency. It's the ultimate test of loyalty. Tony had close ties to the Noonan family, a name that could silence a room. But when it came to the split of the Oldham loot, the maths didn't add up. A fracture formed, and the gears of ambush began to turn. February the 22nd, 1991, the Penny Black pub. Tony pulled up at his white Ford Cosworth, expecting a meeting. He was asked one question: "Are you strapped?" To which he said no. It was the last mistake he would ever make. A taxi blocked his path, and guns were fired. Tony tried to run, but the bullets caught him. And as he lay there, fighting for his life, looking up at the sky, one final shot was fired, which put an end to White Tony and his infamous ways on the cold streets of Manchester. The trial that followed was a media circus, and the Noonan brothers stood in the dock. But in a city gripped by fear, evidence was thin, and the jury couldn't reach a verdict. But behind the legend of Gunchester was a grandmother's grief, Tony being the grandson of Winnie Johnson, a woman who spent her entire life searching on the moors for a lost son. Winnie once said that identifying Tony felt like losing both of them at once, one taken by a monster on the moors, and one taken by the streets that he chose to rule. The murder of White Tony remains unsolved, another story from that time that never fully closed, and the heartbreak of a grieving grandmother.
That is allegedly the story that went down. Now, like I said to you, you know about Winnie bringing him up. You knew the heartache that she went through with Keith. And Winnie had to go through this all over again when she found out her adopted son, Anthony, had been gunned down. Now, these were massive, massive crimes, the pair of them. One being on Saddleworth Moor and one being on the streets. You know, not even far from where Winnie lived, really. And she had to deal with that. She had to go through all that heartache yet again. And for a woman that had been through two massive tragedies, you would think that would be enough for any person, you know? You would think they would give up on life. But somehow, Winnie stayed strong, and it must have obviously broken her to pieces. But she never gave up on life. She never gave up trusting people. And yet again, she had to go through all that trauma that she went through with Keith. She had to go through it again with Anthony. Now, there's a reason why I'm here today, is because Anthony and Winnie are both buried in this cemetery. So without further ado, let's head over there now and pay our respects. Right, so here we are, and this is the grave of Anthony Johnson, aka White Tony. And I'll just read what it says. It says, in loving memory of Anthony James Johnson, born the 22nd of July, 1968, died 22nd of February, 1991, aged 22 years. A dearly beloved father, son, grandson, brother, friend, and in-law. And in the centrepiece here, we've got his name Tony, what he went by. But I can't help but sort of think to myself, you know, surely, why would you go down that life of crime knowing the heartache that Winnie went through? I know we're all different and we can be products of our surroundings, can't we? But I just could never put my family through what he put Winnie through, you know, after what she went through with Keith. And he's got his car on here, I think it's an old Cozzy. Massive fanatic on his cars, but just 22 years old, you know, and had children as well. It's such a shame, you know, what could have been. But yeah, I'm going to leave this one here, everyone. This is the grave of Tony Johnson, aka White Tony. And in true Winnie style, you know, she wanted to be buried close to the people that she loved the most. And we have Tony's grave here, and then just to the right we have Winnie's, and this is the grave of poor Winnie Johnson. And it's great to see that it's kept well, and there's flowers still, and there's a beautiful photograph of her and her husband, I presume that's her husband, on the grave. James David Johnson, dearly loved husband, dad and granddad. And then Winnie Johnson, 1933 to 2012, beloved wife, mum, gran and great gran in our hearts always. Some beautiful words. But she is literally, you know, the mum from Manchester with the biggest heart in the world, you know, and for nearly 50 years she was waiting and waiting for that phone call that Keith had been found, or, you know, sadly she never lived to see that. And she once said that her greatest fear is dying before Keith was ever found. And sadly she was, you know, laid to rest, unable to bring her son home and have somewhere she could pay her respects and mourn properly. Poor Winnie is buried with Keith's iconic glasses, the glasses that you can see on the photograph of him. She's actually buried with them, and it's kept tightly to her. So all I want to say, Winnie, is I hope that this story has done you some justice. You know, a lot of people forget how much you went through in life, and you did nothing but love. You know, you did nothing but love people and trust people, and I hope the video has done you justice, and I hope to God, I pray that you are reunited with Keith. I really, really do hope that you're reunited with him. And just to show my appreciation, I know it's not much and they've been in my bag, so I am sorry, but I've got you some flowers which I'll put here. But I've got you some flowers and they are a bit squished because they've been in my bag. But yeah, may you rest in peace, Winnie. You have the biggest heart in the world, and I just hope that your heart is now mended and you're in heaven, reunited with your beautiful son Keith. So I just want to say a massive thank you for taking the time out to watch this video. I know it's a real heavy one. It's a heavy subject to cover, but it's one that I felt compelled to do. You know, I've watched a lot of documentaries on the Moors murders. You know, there's stuff on YouTube, there's documentaries, there's even stuff on Netflix, but they all seem to centre around the story of Brady and Inley. And not for 1 minute the people sort of think about the victims, really. You know, not many people know that Winnie went through 2 heartbreaks, 2 of the biggest crimes in Manchester. You know, the Moors murders is like one of Manchester's darkest, if not the darkest crime ever, along with like Harold Shipman's story and things like that. And people forget that Winnie was involved in that, and she was involved in a gangland murder of her own adoptive son. So she went through 2 of these, and not many people know. And I just wanted to make this video to highlight what a woman she were. You know, what a strong mother, a resilient in the face of fear. And sure, you know, obviously she was broken. She was a broken soul, but she was strong still for a family. Her poor son, I watched the documentary the other day, her poor son, Alan, has gone through the same trauma as what his mum has gone through. And you can see it on his face, you know, the broken people. but there's still living hope. There's still hope that one day Keith will be found. And from the bottom of my heart, I really, really do hope that they find him for his brother's sake now. And maybe, you know, he will. So I just want to say a massive thank you. The rain's coming in. So massive thank you for taking the time out to watch this video. And all I will ask is if you would share it. You know, just share the video to someone that you think it might enlighten them a bit, or maybe, oh, they didn't know this. And just spreads the word about Winnie as well. But it helps me and my algorithm. So that is all I'll ask from this video, is that you share it. Feel free to subscribe, it don't cost a penny. And it just helps us get stories like this out in the open. So I'm not going to ramble on too long. Massive, massive thank you for sticking with me. And until next time, everyone, take care, and I'll see you all soon. Cheers.